Well, thank you, Courtney. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. My name is Gus Gonnella. I am the Vice President of Claims at the MEMIC Group, which is a workers' compensation carrier headquartered out of Portland, Maine. I have over 30 years experience in the insurance industry, specifically workers' comp. I've worked for six different insurance companies in my career, and I feel I bring a wealth of knowledge of both being interviewed and conducting interviews. And I'm really excited about sharing my insights with you today to help you position yourself for success. Um, hopefully everyone can see my presentation. As you can see, the title is Mastering the Art of Interviewing, Proven Strategies, very dramatic title. But what I'm going to be doing is simply just sharing my experiences that's made me successful in either landing opportunities, jobs, or finding good candidates. And I would say in most cases, because of these different tactics or principles that I've used, I've been happy to say very successful in both. So wanted to give you an overview. Um, of our presentation today, what we're going to be talking about. And one, we're going to talk about preparing for an interview. Then we're going to go into mastering behavior-based interview techniques, which has been around for probably this um, way of doing things as far as interviews are concerned, has been around for probably 50 years or more, but yet it's still a very effective way of doing it. And I've read somewhere that 75% of all companies use behavior-based interviewing for their questions in their interviews. Um, Typical industry interview questions I'll share with you. It won't be an exhaustive list, but I'll share some of the ones that I use when I interview folks, and pretty much you'll see almost every time you interview. Um, Interview day essentials, and then we'll end up with post-interview best practices. So let's dive right in, shall we? Preparation for the interview. There's some things in here that are extremely important that I recommend you do prior. This is after you get the call from the HR person saying, "Hey, we'd love to bring you in for an interview, whether in person or via WebEx or some other format." This is after the fact. So now your job will be to really start preparing for the interview, making sure you're in the best possible position to be successful. And the main thing you should do, one of the main things you should do is conduct thorough research of the company that you're interviewing with. And that's going beyond just going on their website. I really think you need to look into their social media footprint, check out their LinkedIn site, check out what they've posted on LinkedIn, look at any charities that they may be participating in, really get an understanding of their culture and their background, what's important to them. Look at their financial statements if they're public, or check out their financial ratings. Any bits of information you get beyond just what they put out there on the website, because mostly on the website is going to be all positive stuff, of course, but it won't be as in depth as what you'll find out there on the internet. There's Indeed, there's Glassdoor, there's reviews that are being done, and take some of those reviews with a grain of salt sometimes, because it could be employees that just were disgruntled and not happy for whatever reason. But you can get some information, glean some information about the company in there as well. So that would be one of the first steps you should take. Um, then anticipate common questions. Get ready, get geared up that, all right, there's going to be a certain number of common questions, and I'm going to go into specific ones after a couple of slides in, but start thinking about what are going to be some of the common questions that they ask. And the way you do that, first off, is you really try to understand the job role and the job description and the responsibilities of the job. So thoroughly read through that, start anticipating what kind of questions will come after reading through that. Make sure you're clear on the job requirements. And if you're not, be prepared to ask questions at the interview to seek clarification. The one question you shouldn't be asking is, so what exactly do we do in this job? Because that would not go over well. So make sure you understand the job. And if there's always times where you're reading a job description and it's not very clear, certain parts of the job, it could be a little vague. So that's your opportunity to ask questions when you actually get to the interview. So going into questions a little further, prepare thoughtful questions. And what I mean is, you know, after the interview, there's always that end of the interview where the interviewer says, "Hey, do you have any questions for me? I've asked you a bunch of questions. I'd like to know if you have any for me." It is a bad look if you say, "No, I'm good." I think really try to make sure you have two or three questions at hand, just to show that you're truly engaged in the process, and it definitely impresses the interviewer if you do. And I picked three of my favorites. I'm sure maybe others would have more. And these three are always really good questions to ask. They seem to apply in every situation. Can you tell me more about the company culture? And they may have talked about company culture in the interview, or may have come up, but you could always ask this question to get in more depth, or maybe ask for another example of them demonstrating their company culture. It's always good. I see questions coming up. Do you want me to stop here?
Oh, no, I was asking folks in the chat, what are some questions
Okay.
that they like to ask at the end of interviews? So if you do have those, feel free to add those to the chat. We're always welcoming additional examples.
Yes, and I'm always willing to steal those examples for my own use. So, is there anything else I can share about my experience that would be helpful? Is another great question, because you want to make sure that you've answered all their questions, that you left nothing on the table, that you've made sure that everything was all their questions were met, and all their concerns were met. You don't want to walk out of there wondering, all right, did I give them everything they needed? Asking that question, that's an easy way to find that out, and they'll be happy to answer that question. Another one is, how do I compare with other candidates that you've interviewed? That's another great one. You can see where you stand. I mean, they may not always be completely honest with you, but maybe they will. But it's still just an excellent question to ask. You might be early on in the process, or maybe you're the first candidate and they really don't have a lot to say, but it'll be interesting the response that you get there, and it will be very useful information for you. Um, Last but not least, for preparation, questions to avoid. And these are pretty obvious ones. I would say, stay away from any questions about, vacation days, about how much you'll make, when you'll get a promotion. Those types of things are just not good questions to ask, especially in the first interview. You can ask questions like, what's the development plan for this role? Where do you see this role in, 5 years? That kind of thing is okay, but stay away from any specific financial type questions. It just makes it look like that's all you care about is the financial part, and not the actual role itself. And if I could add to that is, this is my philosophy, never take a role purely just for the money. It has to be an opportunity that you really that you'll enjoy, or that you feel fits your job skills. The money is something secondary. It always should be. And if you do that, you're going to be a lot more successful in life, and you'll have a better career.
Yeah. And I would add one thing when you talked about conducting thorough research or that area of things, I've heard somebody say, ask the recruiter. So before you even get into these interviews, usually you have a recruiter that's, talking to you ahead of time. Would it be okay to ask them questions about the company to get to know it a little bit better as well?
Yeah, if there's a recruiter involved, definitely. And if they're a good recruiter, they're going to do that for you. You won't even have to ask, but make sure you do ask and get more detail from them. Remember, though, the recruiter is working for the employer as much as they're working for you. In fact, the employer is who's paying them. So be careful. Still understand that they are representing the employer, and be careful what you ask them, because you could put yourself in a interesting position if you ask questions that you wouldn't normally ask the employer.
Yeah, that's a good note.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to move on to our next slide. So, behavior-based interview techniques. Behavior-based interviewing has been something that I learned very early on in my career, and it still rings true today. It's the best method, I think, of asking questions, of getting to the right candidate. And really, the basis of behavior-based interviewing is, it was developed in the early 70s by industrial psychologists. But at the end of the day, the idea behind it is the approach of focusing on assessing candidates' past behavior and knowing that that past behavior can be a predictor of future performance and making sure that your questions are geared towards that. Now, that's as the interviewer. As the interviewee, you should be ready to provide examples that will show past behavior is a good indicator of future performance. And those past behaviors, those examples, don't necessarily have to be specifically industry examples. They could be something from school, something from a volunteer job that you took, a project that you were personally involved in. It doesn't always have to be specifically on point to the job at hand. And I think that's more important for folks that are earlier on in the process of interviewing, coming out of college, don't have a lot of professional experience. Keep that in mind that you can use personal or other different examples. So go into behavior-based interview preparation. Again, focusing on the past experience and behaviors. Highlight relevant experiences, okay, that demonstrate your skills and competence. Identify key skills and competencies in the job description and try to match up your answers and your stories, your examples to those key competencies. That's part of the the presentation of behavior based. So it works for the employer, but it also works for you as as a being interviewed. There is this also out there called the STAR method, which also, believe it or not, came out in the 70s. And the STAR method is a great way to kind of format and structure your thoughts around what is a good example of demonstrated abilities. And you basically want to think of the context of an example of what was the example, what were you involved in, what were you doing. So if it was a customer service question, I was answering a phone call from a disgruntled customer who was unhappy with some service that we provided. That's the setting. And then what was your actions? What did you do with that customer? What did you say? Give details of the back and forth. And what was the ultimate result of that interaction? And what have you learned from it? And always have at least a few examples per question that you anticipate coming your way, because they might say to you, "Oh, that's a great example. Can you tell me another one?" And don't be standing there going, "Oh, I only thought of one." So make sure you have at least two. It's very rare someone says, "All right, give me a third," but it can happen. But I think having that extra one in the can is always a good thing. Um, so you're preparing these stories, and you want to make sure that while you're preparing those stories, you practice delivering that story, delivering that example. If I can't emphasize more, the mock interview is a great tool for you because some of you, including me, get a little bit of anxiety right before those interviews, right? You get a little nervous. And if you practiced it and you've already said it in front of somebody else, whether a friend or a relative, whatever, and they gave you constructive feedback, even if you look in the mirror and start practicing it and looking at yourself as you're saying these things, that's better than nothing. But the mock interview is really, really good tool to kind of get rid of the butterflies, make you feel confident about what you're saying. Getting that immediate feedback from another individual will really help you present yourself much better and be ready for that interview in a very confident way. So take my advice, do the mock interviews. You might feel silly, but it is definitely a great tool to prepare you. Be honest and reflective. And what I mean by that is if you don't know the answer, don't try to fudge it. Don't try to come up with a creative response to it. They're going to weed out the being deceptive thing, and then that presents very, very poorly for you. But if you're honest, say, you know what? I don't really have that in my background, or I'm not sure about that, or whatever. That is people will respect that. And it's not, you don't have to have the answer for everything. And if you don't know it, it's better just to be honest about it. But even the examples you do provide, make sure they're real examples, make sure they're realistic. And it's really easy to figure that out when you start giving details. And last but not least, be positive, be very energetic and positive. Do not come off complaining. Do not complain about past workers or past boss, managers. You don't want to come off as that negative Nelly type person. You want to paint a very positive picture. And even if you had a difficult time, think about what you've learned from those things in a positive way when you're giving your examples. Sometimes an example of what not to do is always a good thing, as what was done by certain managers. So, and use that as a positive reinforcement. So that's the overview of behavior-based interviewing. Um, and I'm going to move on to some questions that I think you'll see in most interviews. So these are the common insurance industry questions, but I'm sure they're very common in other industries. But I can only say that I always ask these questions in interviews, especially when I have someone who's kind of new to the industry. And, if they've been around a long time, you're going to ask more technical questions, but you'll still throw in a few of these behavior based to get to the soft skills, the emotional intelligence of that individual. Um, but I'll give you some of these, and you'll probably have seen these before, and I'll explain why they're important. Can you share an experience where you worked collaboratively with a team? So, in almost every job you have, no matter what you do, you're going to be working with somebody, with another department, with another teammate, with your manager, with vendor partners. There's always going to be some collaboration going on. So they really will want to see that you're capable of collaborating with others and doing it well. And great examples of that, again, could be something you did in school, could be a team, a sports team that you're on, any kind of club that you joined. Use those as great examples of where you've collaborated. Describe a situation where you had to solve a challenging problem. Can't get away from problems. Problems are going to happen all the time, and they want to know how you're able to cope with those problems and address those problems logically with critical thinking. This is what they're trying to get at in that example. So make sure that you have some really good examples of where you've overcome some problems or issues. Provide an example of where you demonstrated outstanding customer service skills. And here, everybody is a customer, is my philosophy. No matter what job you do, treat everyone like a customer and you're going to be successful. And so there should be no problem finding some good examples of where you had to, the typical customer situation is, like I said, a phone call comes in, or you're in the call center, or you worked at a grocery store and a customer was unhappy with one of the products that they bought. It was defective or spoiled. But everybody's a customer. Your manager's a customer. The vendor partners you work with are customers. Your other departments that you work with are all customers. So there should be plenty of examples that you can provide. And how you prioritize your task on a typical day. So you might often hear the phrase, I multitask. I'm a good multitasker. I don't particularly like that phrase because I can't imagine multitasking isn't real, right? No one can do two things at the same time, not well at least. But prioritization is really what you're doing, right? And that's the most important thing. Can you prioritize more important subjects, more important tasks, and push aside less important tasks and do that effectively? Because if you can't, you're not going to be very effective in what you do in work. And they really need to see someone demonstrate that. That's a very important skill set. And if you can provide examples of where you've done, just prioritize things in a day where you're asked to do something, drop everything and take care of something else, and then get back to that task at hand. That is something that you should be looking to talk about and share. Tell me about a time when you had to learn something new quickly. That gets to the adaptability and ability to adapt to change and learn new things, right? That's going to be very important, especially as a young professional just breaking into a new industry. They want to know, they realize you don't have the background or experience directly to what they're asking you to do, but they want to know they have someone who's capable of learning quickly and adapting. And in this world, things are changing all the time. New technologies, new methods are coming out all the time. And they really need people that are willing to embrace change and learn on the fly. And that's an important skill set in any industry, but especially in the insurance industry. So show them that you're adaptable and willing to change and give them specific examples of where you've learned new things and embraced change in a positive way. And lastly, give examples of instances where you had to take a leadership role. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, I'm only going to the single contributor role. I don't want to be a manager. I'm not ready for that. Or maybe I never want to be a manager. But everything you do is a leadership role. Everything, whether informal or formal, you take leadership roles and you got to be comfortable with doing that. You either set an example for the other teammates on your team, and that's a leadership role, or if you're a claim adjuster and you're handling a claim, you are the leader of that claim. You're the quarterback. You're designating, a nurse to do something. You're telling an attorney to do something else. You're giving them input and you're collaborating with them all and you're making sure you're getting the case resolved. You are the quarterback, you are a leader in that claim, even though you are a single contributor. So being able to demonstrate that leadership skills is going to be very important in anything you do, even if you don't want to be ultimately, in a formal management role. So these are some of the questions. It's not exhaustive. There's others out there that I'm sure you even can think of or others can think of, but those you can be sure all six of those will be on the list. I know if I'm interviewing you, they will be. So,
I love this. I love this list. And one of the things that I like to do, because I do get nervous, and I can do those mock interviews and, try to prepare for it, but I'm going to forget my examples. So one of the things I like to do, especially even if you're in person, having your notes and having, a list of projects or situations, things like that, where it's just a bullet and you already
mhm.
know the situation. You just have a title of what that situation was so you can
Yeah.
recall it easily.
Yes. And you want something to just as a reminder. I don't see a problem with having bullets of notes nearby, and I don't see a problem with taking notes either. Right? If that interviewer says something that's very important, writing that down, jotting that down is very important. So you'll remember it later when you want to follow up with them at some point in time. So I agree. Okay, moving on to our next slide. The day of the interview, the big day has arrived. So. Um, I know it sounds cliche, but you can never, what's the saying? You only make a first impression once. Um, and that is extremely true in an interview process, right? You want to make sure that you make a good first impression. And I know that this is the casual world, and I know sometimes these interviews are done via, WebEx or whatever, Zoom, but you should still dress like you're there in person and dress in a suit and tie. I'm a big suit and tie guy, especially in the insurance industry, suit and tie, even though maybe when you actually start working there, you won't have to wear a suit and tie. I think for an interview, it's the right approach every time, unless they tell you don't. Like if you get something from HR, you don't need to wear, you don't have to dress like that. If they come out and tell you that, then you can comply with that. But I would say err on the side of caution. Um, I say here firm handshake and making good eye contact. You can't actually do that when you're doing it via WebEx. But if you're in person, which still interviews are happening in person these days, not as much as they used to, make sure you do that. You give them the firm handshake, you look them in the eye, um, and you look very confident when you walk into the room. If you're via WebEx, you can still try to maintain eye contact and not be looking over here or looking down a lot, looking like almost like you're multitasking or prioritizing. Um, so exuding confidence, listen attentively and actively. This is a big one for me. Um, Listen to the questions that are being asked. Make sure you understand what is being asked of you, right, before you answer. And if you are not sure, seek clarification. It's okay. You can mirror the question they said and then say, "This is what I heard you say. Is this what you mean?" It's okay to do that. In fact, it shows that you're really listening and you're really engaged. And you're not going to make a mistake by giving them the wrong answer or giving them an answer to something else that you thought they asked. And if they ask a question and you're not immediately ready to answer and you're thinking about it, that's okay too. You can pause and think it over before you speak. You don't have to be, oh, they're going to think I don't know what I'm doing here if I have to wait a moment. No, it's perfectly fine to wait and pause and think it over before you actually speak. So, just something that I would say you should think about in the interview. And again, back to being genuine and authentic. Tell real stories about yourself, be your true self, because you want them to know your true self because you're going to be potentially working at that company for years to come and you don't want any surprises afterwards. And if you don't know answers, if you don't have that in your background, be clear that you don't don't know it or don't have it, and you would love to learn it, or you're looking forward to learning more about this in this new role. So that's the day of the interview. Moving on to after the interview, which is very important. Okay, there's two pieces to it. There is the immediate follow-up here, and then there's reconnecting maybe after a certain delay. With the immediate follow-up, I think it's good to, like, the next day, send an email or a letter to the interviewer, to whoever interviewed you, just kind of expressing gratitude for their time, reiterating your interest, and maybe highlighting a couple of things that were talked about you think that are right in line with your background and your skill set, and you're very excited about it. Offer any additional information. Maybe talk about, I'll reach, is it okay if I reach out to you in a month or so and just check in to see how things are going, kind of set the table for that, so that if you don't hear from them in a while, you can then reconnect with them after a delay and just say, do a follow-up email, maybe a month later, or 2 months later, 2 months later. Sometimes while you're interviewing with them, or maybe as they ask you questions and you have an opportunity to ask them, you could say, what is the time frame, the turnaround you're looking at here of making a decision? So then you have an idea of when you should reach out again if you don't hear anything first. Again, reaffirming interest, requesting an update, acknowledging that this process takes a long time. And that's one thing I talk to a lot of young people coming out of college, and they say, I put my resume in, it's been weeks, I haven't heard from them, or I did an interview and I thought they were super excited about me and I haven't heard from them. Understand these companies, they have a lot going on in their day jobs. It's not just the HR people involved, it's the hiring managers, and they're very busy and trying to schedule these interviews. And they probably have multiple interviews they're doing, and they're trying to fit that in their schedule along with their regular day job. So it does take time. So don't always assume if you don't hear back as quickly as you like that they're just ignoring you, or are they not interested in you. I've had one job, it took a total of altogether from the time I first talked to the recruiter to the time I got hired, like 5, 6 months. So it can take a long time before that process before you get that offer for the job. So just keep that in mind. Don't be discouraged all the time that it doesn't move as fast as you like. Um, so that's the reconnecting, staying on their radar, making sure they know you're still interested. It's okay to do that. If you do it professionally and you don't, you know, do it too often, give them a little bit of time, and setting the expectation that you will be following up. So that's after the interview. Here's another area that I think some folks are a little uncomfortable with or not sure to do is when you get an offer. Okay. Lo and behold, they offered you the job. Yay, right? You're excited. This is awesome. Thank them for the offer. It's okay to express gratitude, but request time, right? Even if it's a job you've been so excited about getting, you know you're going to love it. I think no matter what, when they make an offer, say, yes, thank you very much for the offer. I'd like to take a day to think about it, right? 24 hours. Because there's a lot going on right there in that moment. You're excited. You got the offer. Sometimes it could be via email, but oftentimes it's a call. You're very excited. You're not listening as clearly to everything that they're offering to you. There's a lot of information they'll be sharing with you. Give yourself a moment to take a break and say, look, this is exciting. I'm so glad you made an offer. Can I have a day to think it over? And then look at it thoroughly. Look at what they're offering, what the benefits are, what the compensation package is, exactly the start date and everything like that. At this moment in time, when they make that offer, you have the most leverage you're ever going to have with that organization because they put a lot of time and effort into you, and they like you, and they out of all the candidates they chose you, and they made an offer to you. So you're in a position where you can be in the driver's seat for a little bit. Okay. Now, after you take a look at that offer, make sure there's nothing in it that's confusing to you, that you're clear on what exactly is being offered, and don't have a problem with following up with them and asking questions for clarification. So what does this mean when you say this? And is this the PTO date is this? And so I think you want to make sure at that time you fully understand the offer and what they're giving you, and make sure there's no misunderstandings about the benefit structure, everything. that you're being offered. And lastly, don't be afraid to make a counteroffer. If the offer you got, maybe the salary wasn't what you really wanted or thought it was going to be, or maybe the bonus structure, or maybe the vacation time, or maybe the start date, whatever. If there's something in there that you feel is just not something that's in line with what you want, you can make a counteroffer, but you need to do it in a very professional way and you need to be reasonable. You can't come at them with a ridiculous number as far as salary. You need to have a good understanding of what you should be making in that role and what you're worth based on your experience or whatever. But it's okay to come back to them with a counteroffer. And they might say, we'll get back to you and we'll see what we can do. They might just say, nope, this is it. This is all we can do and why. And then you need to decide, am I going to take the offer anyway, or am I going to move on? But have that already in mind when you're making that offer. Do not make a counter offer. Do not make an ultimatum unless you're really going to go through with it. Do not use that tactic. But it can be done. Counter offers are expected by the employer. It's not something they're going to be like, oh, this ungrateful person. I just offered them this wonderful package and you didn't take it. I think they'll respect you that you make a counter offer. I mean, I know I would if I was making an offer to you, and I would expect it as well. So just some thoughts about the counteroffer. That's an uncomfortable thing. It's a little nerve-wracking, especially because you're so excited about getting the job. You just want to grab onto it and take it and not even try. But I recommend otherwise in most cases. Lastly, dealing with rejection. This is important too, okay? And I'm telling you this from an employer that hired a bunch of folks. Um, I know you'll be upset, you'll be very disappointed, but do not show it. Okay. Be very professional, appreciate the consideration, request feedback. Sometimes they'll give you constructive feedback. Ask for it. They may not. I mean, some of the HR folks refrain from giving feedback. They're concerned about giving feedback, but some will. Some will tell you. Um, Express future interest. So this is important. Like, hey, appreciate this opportunity. I really liked what you guys had to say. This company is really a company I'd like to work for. It's unfortunate that this didn't work out, but if there's other opportunities that come along, please consider me. Again, I would be very happy to go through the process again. And the reason for that is I can't tell you how many times I've been in an interview process. We've had multiple candidates. They're all really, really good candidates, but one person kind of just slightly rose to the top, was a little bit better than the rest, or just fit what we needed a little bit better in that particular role. And we made the offer. And we're thinking, so, man, if we had another job, I would definitely hire this other person, or I hire that other person. And guess what? A month later, someone leaves us or moves on. Now we got an opening. And we always say, well, let's go back to those candidates that we interviewed. They were really good, strong candidates, and we won't have to start all over again. And so keeping that relationship warm, letting them know that you're still open to a future opportunity, what might lead to them coming back to you a few months later and offering you a job. So that's why that's important. And you never want to burn bridges because you just never know what could happen in the future. So that's kind of my overview here of beginning to end from preparation to offer. I hope that you guys found this useful, this information. I hope that you took some nuggets out of here that will help you in your next interview. And I'm glad I was able to share this with you all.
Awesome. Thanks, Gus. This was very sound advice, a lot of good information in here. I think it might help people be a little bit more confident with certain things, whether they're interviewing or being the interviewer, and how they should go about this. But if you do have any questions, go ahead and put them in the QA. Gus and I will stay on for a little bit. Otherwise, we appreciate your time today.
And I would be willing to offer up my email address if people think of anything later and want to reach out to me.
Awesome. Yeah.
Certainly can do that as well.
In the chat, that'd be awesome.
Yes. I'll type it up as we speak. I think I got it right there.
Awesome. Perfect. I see it.
Oh, you're welcome.
I don't see any questions so far. We'll give it another minute, but again, appreciate y'all joining.